Okay, I guess we can get started and then people can join us while we're talking. President Pedroja just joined us. Welcome, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Stacy, can you make sure all cameras can be on? Okay, I guess we can get started. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the Youth Standing Against Racism webinar in observance of our first ever student-run statewide campus community building day. My name is Yorgo Gushi. I am the chair of the Student Advisory Council and also Community Colleges Segmental Advisor to the Massachusetts Board of Higher Education, and I will be your moderator today. I am excited and honored to be joined by 4 exemplary leaders of the public higher education system of our Commonwealth. First, our Commissioner of Higher Education, Carlos Santiago, the champion of the Department of Higher Education's equity agenda. Additionally, we are joined by Dr. Luis Pedraja, President of Quinsigamond Community College, an equity-minded institution leader with whom I've had the privilege to work with. Last but not least, our students panelists, colleagues of mine as members of the Student Advisory Council, Anna Johnson, student trustee from Worcester State University, and Artie Capellas, student trustee from Bridgewater State University. They both played a crucial role in organizing this webinar and the community building day as a whole. Thank you all for joining us today. A little bit of background information for the campus community building day. On February 2nd, 2020, the Student Advisory Council and the Massachusetts Board of Higher Education voted and unanimously approved the creation of a statewide campus community building day, which for the first time takes place today on April 6th, 2022. The Student Advisory Council has been committed to implementing the statewide campus community building day in order to create communities across the 29 public higher education institutions of our Commonwealth, guided by shared values, an unyielding dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a fundamental commitment to supporting one another. This year's theme, as I mentioned, is Youth Standing Against Racism. The goal of this theme is to engage students, administrators, faculty, staff, and campus police officers to foster a statewide culture of tolerance, equity, equality, and anti-racism, while calling on every one of us to stand up against racial prejudice and intolerant attitudes. To ensure a successful campus community building day, we asked all 29 campuses to organize, in collaboration with their student government association, at least one event to support youth standing against racism. The format, audience, content, and organization were at the campus's discretion, and I would like to thank all the institutions that participated and are still participating in our campaign, either by organizing individual events or by attending this webinar. But I would like to give a special shout out to my community colleges who are always rock stars when it comes to participating in events and supporting important initiatives like this one. This is only the beginning of a campus community building day. We are hoping that the future student leaders are going to continue this tradition. As COVID-19 virus began to spread in early 2020, a parallel pandemic was unleashed of hatred, violence, and fear against certain ethnic groups and nationalities. It quickly became clear that stark inequities, sometimes rooted in racism, had subjected people of African descent, indigenous people, and people of color to significantly higher risk of infection and death. Many of our students heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, including those from minority backgrounds, are now grappling with an increase in racial discrimination, in addition to severe disruptions to their education, diminished employment prospects, and limited ability to participate in public life, which sometimes individuals which stymies their individual and social empowerment. Our students should be empowered to realize their rights to freedom of expression, assembly, and access to information, for they too have the right to participate in the life of their community. Our students, including these from minority backgrounds who may face discrimination, deserve stronger support in securing decent work and strengthening their job prospects. Our students have the right to learn about human rights and about human rights tools that can be used to fight against oppression, racism, and discrimination. Every year, more than 500,000 college students are targets to bias-driven slurs and physical assaults. Every day, at least one hate crime occurs on a college campus. Every minute, a college student somewhere sees or hears a racist, sexist, homophobic, or otherwise biased words or images. It is time for us to take action and follow these simple steps. Stacy, if you could go on the next slide, please. Some ways to fight racism on campus are first by rising up. Inaction in the face of hate will be viewed as apathy, or worse yet, as support of bigotry itself. Do something. Don't let hate go unchallenged. 2, pull together. Bias incidents and hate crimes can divide communities. Do not let hate tear people apart on your campus. Pull together instead. 3, speak out. When hate strikes, don't remain silent. Join with others. Use your voices to denounce bigotry. Also, help guide the administration in its role. Next slide, please. 4, teach tolerance. Bias crises often bring pain, anger, and distrust to campus. They also present an opportunity for learning. Don't miss the chance to eradicate ignorance. 4, maintain momentum. The immediate crisis has passed. You've got 2 papers due and a midterm coming up. No one seems interested to follow up with meetings, but what happens now? Students have to continue following up. And last but not least, pass the torch. What happens when you leave campus? Will you leave behind a record of activism that will inspire incoming students to pick up the fight? Make sure you do. Make sure you inspire your future student leaders. Furthermore, our state motto is, by the sword we seek peace, but peace only under liberty. We do have peace, so let us also have racial, ethnical, linguistic, and cultural liberty, and that can be done in investing in public higher education. We must be willing to look at students' outcomes and disparities at all educational levels, disaggregated by race and ethnicity, as well as socioeconomic status. We owe to recognize that individual students are not responsible for the unequal outcomes of groups that have historically experienced discrimination and marginalization in the United States. Respect for the aspiration and struggles of students who are not well served by the current educational system is essential. As I have said almost 2 years ago, in education, there is a golden triangle of quantity, quality, and equity. You just cannot ignore one while strengthening the others. Let us all collaborate to keep this golden triangle together and help it transform into a pyramid with a strong base consisting of human communication and mutual respect. And let us all build upon it. I would like to finish by reciting some very inspiring words I read in the book called Inspiration for LGBT Students and Their Allies. I believe success is the freedom to be yourself. I believe nobody is wrong, they're only different. I believe your circumstances do not define you, rather they reveal you. I believe without a sense of caring, there can be no sense of community. I believe our minds are like parachutes. They only work if they're open. I believe we only live once, but if we live it right, one time is all we'll need. I believe we must get along with ourselves before we can get along with others. I will seek to understand you, I will label bottles and not people. Know this, your voice, your actions, your input matter, because things improve only when people like you, people like us, like students, administrators, take action, because each student activist has the power to make a difference. And because apathy in some ways is as dangerous as hate. Thank you all for joining. Now, I would like to turn the panel over to Commissioner Santiago, who will talk about what the DHE is doing to support equity, the equity agenda, the 10-year strategic plan, and how is this specifically addressing students of color. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorgo. And let me take this opportunity to thank you for all of the things that you've done over the last few years. I think you and I have been on the board for a long time, so we know each other well. And I appreciate your leadership on a wide variety of areas, and bringing this Campus Community Day to realization is one of those things. So good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. I want to acknowledge my fellow panelists, President Luis Pedraja of Quinsigamond Community College. And Luis I don't always make good decisions, but I can tell you one really good decision I made, which was to participate in the selection of Luis as president of Quinsigamond Community College. And I'm delighted that he accepted and agreed and has done such good work. And Anna, I think you and I have met. I think we met at a board meeting. Am I correct?
You are correct, Commissioner.
Okay. And I think that was actually a very momentous board meeting. I don't know if you've heard that I have referred to that, and I referred to, I believe it was your encounter and some of the commentary that you have made over time at that board meeting. It was one that really impacted the direction of the work that we moved forward. And I think it was around the issue of the Students' Bill of Rights at the time, and how you reflected on that. But in any event, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to try and make my comments brief. I will certainly stick to the time. And I was wondering what to say. I mean, I certainly could talk about the equity agenda, and I will as well. But I wanted to do a little bit of reflection, which is something you can do when you've been in higher education for 42 years, and you know that all the other panelists weren't around when you were a student. So I can say anything I want. No one can contradict me, because they probably weren't there. But as I contrast today and today's students with those of the late 60s, early 1970s, we are in similar periods of time, in the sense that nationally, it was a very disruptive time. We were in the middle of a war, the Vietnam War at the time. I remember sitting in a college dorm room with my suite mates, and we were watching the draft on TV, and we were watching to see, because you were drafted depending upon your birth date, and it was a big ball with a lot of the little rolling balls in it, and they would have a birth date, and then they'd pull it out. And if you were picked in the top third, you would be drafted. If you were in the second third, you might be drafted. And if you were in the last third, based on your birthday that was picked, you would not be drafted. And I remember that when my birthday came up, when December 7th came up, it was at the last third, but it didn't happen to everybody. So it was a difficult period for students. We were dealing with that. We were dealing with a great schism in the society at the time, largely due to those and many of us that really were in the midst of the civil rights movement, the women's movement. It was a period of a lot of contrast and a lot of tension. I say that because today, what we are living today is very similar. In fact, I think it's harder for students today than it was then. From the perspective, from the lens of a student in the 70s, early 70s, we were optimistic. We thought we could change everything. We thought society was changing and we were part of it. And today, I hope that optimism, and I think it will come from the students. You are living times that I think are more difficult, more treacherous than those of the early 70s. You've had to face a pandemic, which has basically shut down your institutions as you understood them to operate and created something new. Are involved. We are trying to promote racial reconciliation and racial justice and social justice at a time when there is considerable pushback. One of the reasons why we're having, I suspect, this meeting. It is unparalleled, the kind of pushback that we're seeing today. We're talking in Massachusetts about our agenda for racial equity and focusing a strategic plan on racial equity. We are very clear that's what we're focusing on. And yet I open the newspaper, and every day I see another state that is basically saying, governors and legislators that are saying, you can't talk about these things. You can't talk about diversity and inclusion. And these are issues that universities should not be discussing, that students should not be discussing. Issues about gender identity that we should not be discussing. And that really is troubling. It's troubling to me because it's antithetical to the notions of a democratic society, a society of openness and of speech and tolerance and reconciliation and social justice. So, in many respects, I think your work today is probably more important than our work was in the early 70s. I think it is more challenging than ever. We didn't have a pandemic to deal with at the time. We had other issues. So I wanted to kind of express my view of solidarity with what you're going through. We're seeing and hearing reports of students just dropping out, students with so many things on their plates, whether it's schoolwork, family issues, job issues, income issues. We're now talking about basic needs. We were in the early 70s, we didn't talk about basic needs with students. We didn't talk about homelessness and hunger. This is a different reality that you're facing. And I think you're up to the task, but I understand how difficult it is for many students. Having said those things, if you look at what I believe, and many others believe, is the singular biggest challenge we face today in higher education. Higher education is changing dramatically. The institutions, the way they teach, the notion of face-to-face instruction versus online instruction, and how that's going to continue to play out in the future post-COVID is an important consideration. Higher education institutions, public and private, are struggling financially. Public higher education in Massachusetts, quite frankly, has not been one of the areas that has been well supported over the years for a long time. And that's something to keep in mind, particularly, and I'll be honest, particularly the community colleges, which is the segment that has 2/3 of our students of color, yet is the one that in terms of funding has certainly not done as well as other segments. Those are things that we need to address as well. Financially, private and public institutions are struggling. We see it. Part of our work in the department is to oversee these institutions. So we know that this is taking place. So how do you remain optimistic in these times? And I think, the work that keeps us going forward, the equity, what we call the equity agenda, is a 10-year strategic plan to increase the diversity of our institutions at all levels, but also to reduce the disparities that we see. The outcomes that we see are not equitable. And I made a statement a couple days ago that turned out to be a little more controversial than I had expected, which was basically, over the last 50 years, there have been policies in place that, well-intentioned policies, but have led to these disparities. We are in part responsible for these disparities over time, and we need to address them at all levels. We need to make sure that students, particularly students of color, transition from high school to college effortlessly. We need to make sure that any deficiencies that any student might have are resolved early and the students come into our institutions to thrive, and that they bring a cultural wealth to our institutions, and that they use the resources, and the institutions provide the resources for the students to succeed. I talk about a cultural shift in our institutions. When I was growing up, and also as a faculty member, I was guilty of this. We would basically look at a student and ask the question, are you good enough to succeed at our institutions? Are you good enough to succeed in my class? In my principles of economics class, I would have stupidest thing in the world. I'd have all the students stand up and I'd say, look to your left, look to your right. Only one of the three of you are going to survive this course. That was the ideology of how we looked at students. Totally wrong. So we need to change that. The institutions need to change that culture. And that's what the equity agenda is all about. And we have presidents like President Pedraja who are doing that. I mean, this equity agenda reflects the work of the campuses as well. So, we need to change that framework from our students ready to go to our institutions to our institutions ready for today's students. Are our institutions prepared to support student success? And that's a simple, that's a change in mindset, not a simple process, but a critical process. And I think our students are facing many more barriers than I faced as a student. We didn't have, student loans were not a big deal. We got grants. Today students are strapped with financially with a lot of financial burden. So I think what you're doing is really important. I think the moment in time is now. If I could, I want to make sure I stick to time. If I could basically say, if you ask me, what can we do, Commissioner, to keep this moving forward? I would say support the equity agenda. We have a plan that in other states, I would be prohibited from even bringing a plan like this. I couldn't do this in North Carolina. I couldn't do this in Florida. I couldn't do this in Texas. I couldn't do this in Wisconsin, and other states are signing on. We're fortunate in Massachusetts, we value education and we value different voices on a variety of areas. So I would say support the efforts that you are doing and the efforts that we are focused on, because I think this is going to be a real struggle. I really do. So let me just say, I certainly want to open it up for questions, but let me say that, this is really important. There's no way I can minimize the work that you're doing. If you thought that if it was just something, well, it's a student event, we'll just, things will move along without any impact, I would say no. I would say right now we are rowing against the current, and the current, what's maybe popular in some areas, is really going to damage students. I mean, if we are not creating a new cadre of students that their primary function is to think critically, then we are failing this nation and we're failing the democracy. If all we're going to be is just accept the status quo and say, that's it, that's how things are going to be, then I think we are failing this democracy. So I'm going to stop there, Yorgo. And Stacy, you let me know if I'm on time or not, because I don't have the agenda in front of me. So you tell me what you want me to do. I'll be happy to take questions and try to provide answers to those questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. You're right on time. You're doing perfectly fine with the agenda. I would like to personally thank you for your leadership in general and for your leadership specifically to the equity agenda. I've been honored to work with you throughout these years as a student, as a member of the Board of Higher Ed, also as chair of the Student Advisory Council, and your input and leadership will definitely be missed in Massachusetts. And I certainly hope that the next commissioner, whoever that is, follows in your footsteps and elevates your really important work. So thank you so much for that. And that being said, I would like to open the floor to questions. If you would like to submit a question for the commissioner, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, or if you guys would like to ask that question in person, you can raise your hand or use the chat, and I can promote you to a panelist so you can turn your mic on and ask the question. I see a question that was submitted to me. What can students do to support the DHE on further anti-racism initiatives? I think you already touched that topic, but if you could explain it a bit more, that would be great.
Sure. You know, the strategic plan that we've begun presenting the draft of, and there'll be a lot of conversations, and there'll be groups of students that will be engaged in these conversations. It's important to listen to the different voices. It's important to hear. You know, eventually we want to bring a product that will always change, but is pretty close to being finalized, at least for presentation to the board at the June meeting. So obviously being involved and engaged in the process is important. One of the things, and I had mentioned it when I talked a little bit about Anna, the Student Bill of Rights is really important. And some people have questioned whether we should have a Student Bill of Rights in the strategic plan for racial equity. And I think we need to. I think it is, if we are basically saying that these plans and these approaches and the changes to policies have to be centered on students and students' experience, students' lived experiences that they bring to our institutions, then we have to be, I think, loyal to that particular creed and have a student bill of rights and have a real, you know, just say it out loud. This plan focuses on students, and there can be other plans and they can focus on other things, but this one focuses on students, and it focuses largely on Black and brown students. But I also say that, you know, the changes that we will bring to bear through this process, through these conversations, and they impact a lot of different areas of the student experience. These changes, which will, you know, be modified from time to time as necessary, these changes will benefit all students. There's nothing that we are proposing that is going to hurt a particular group of students and benefit another one. We are focused on racial equity. We're very clear about that. But the policies and prescriptions and initiatives that will move forward will benefit all students. Because what we are seeing in Massachusetts for these last 50 years is disparities. We are seeing a difference in outcomes. Students of color are not getting the same kinds of opportunities to have higher outcomes for a variety of reasons. And we need to understand that, and we need to change it. So I think just keeping that in mind as you as students think about what's going on is central to any success that we may ever have with this.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Anna, you had a question?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Commissioner. Thank you. And nice to meet you again. So
Yeah.
I have a question. When we talk a lot about equity, I think that's a really important topic, but there are also a lot of different components to equity. When I look at higher education and I look at the preparation done for high schoolers to come to higher education, there's a lot of inequality and a lot of barriers that I said before, and one of those being standardized testing. And we all know the inequalities that lies within standardized testing. The history of standardized testing itself was for segregation. And we have come to a place where we're no longer segregated, I would like to think, but we still fosters things and positions and bills that kind of foster those segregation within schools, because the injustice is a lot of students are not afforded the same opportunity to learn how to be standardized test taker. They don't have money to go to private tutors. So if we're saying that higher education is going to be equitable for our students, but yet and still we have test barriers that keep them from entering higher education. I think that that's a problem. So what is your office doing to kind of help? I know some schools have taken away standardized testing, but there's just still a lot of schools that still foster standardized testing as a way into higher education.
Well, I have a lot of comments about this issue. There are a lot of areas where we have reviewed. I mean, look at remediation. You had to come in and you had to take a standardized test as you walked in the door. And yeah, it was well-intentioned. It was trying to measure how much you knew in that particular area. But the truth is that in the community colleges, the numbers of students that were not passing that still had to pay for it, the course, and got no credit was incredible. So if you look, the community colleges have by and large changed that system. They use tests for specific purposes, but the grade point average or high school grade point average predicts better than that test. So why have people been focusing on the test? And I know President Pedraja has his college did a lot to deal with that. At the state universities, you are likely going to see that most have been going to SAT optional for admissions, and that's probably going to continue because we pushed it. Let me give you one other example that goes way back. In the mid-1950s, and you mentioned segregation and integration. In the early 50s, the Brown versus Board of Education sought to integrate our schools, our K through 12 schools. We all think that was a great idea. But what happened was that there were two separate school systems, a school system for African-American students, for Black students, and a school system for white students. The board, Brown versus Board of Higher Education, did away with that segregation. It brought integration. Good thing. But what is one of the things we complain about today? That you look at the classroom and our faculty and staff are by and large white. They don't look like the student body. They don't have the lived experiences of the student body. Well, it just so happened that one of the results of that process of integration was that 100,000 of those teachers, principals, school officials that were in the Black school system, they didn't move to the white school system. They lost their jobs. So today, when we say, well, gee, in K through 12, 42% of the students are students of color, but only 8% of the teachers, you have to look at what happened in the past. There were a lot of really good teachers of color that were working, and when integration occurred for the right reason, they disappeared from the school system. So what do we have today? We have today basically a student of color walks into a class and, when I went through college, I have to admit, I did my undergraduate in 3 years. I never saw a teacher that was Puerto Rican or had any background that was anywhere near my own. So I think we have to look at our policies and we have to look at them in a very particular way. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Anna, for your question, and thank you, Commissioner. Another question that we had: how is the Department of Higher Education handling homelessness, since that's a really important component of equity?
Handling the homelessness, is that? Yes. I realized the extent of the problem when I went to Bunker Hill Community College when I first came to Massachusetts, and I met with the student leadership. And they started talking about things that I'd never heard of. They started talking about a term that I had not heard, which was couch surfing. And they talked about sleeping in cars. And this is the leadership of the student body. And I found that probably 40% of them had experienced those things while being students. And I thought that's got to be impossible. How can you even think about schoolwork when you don't have a place to live? So one of the first things we did is that we created a system with local state government so that community college students could use unused beds in our state university system. And it worked well. We had support services for those students from the wider community. And it was, I'm not talking hundreds of students, but students that could use these facilities and could be supported in their use as well. And it paid off in the sense that that students went through that, and it's basically an issue that's generally temporary for many of these students, and that's what they needed. The program needs to grow, but it's been launched, and many institutions have taken advantage of it. So we did that, and then we expanded. The federal government allowed us to expand the SNAP benefits to college students, and we pushed that as well. Every campus, every public campus has a food pantry now. So these are things that can be done, and we did it without a lot of money. I mean, the institutions were really very, very supportive of it. So there are things that can be done. Homelessness is something that we can't allow to consist, just like food insecurity is.
And I would like to follow up on this.
Yeah, hi, Commissioner. You said it can be done. I just want to know if you guys have a timeline, right? Because I feel like whilst we're waiting for this to happen, we have more students who are still homeless. We have more students who are still couch surfing. So, and even if they do find a job to help pay for rent, financial aid cut their tuition because they apparently make too much of those too much, so they're not able to afford these things. And a lot of documentation is needed for students to benefit from these programs, these pilot programs. So it takes a very long time for us to get to a place like this. So I want to know if you guys have a timeline, because I think like having a timeline for a work like this is super important, because it kind of helps us visualize the future. Because right now, I don't think I have a vision of the future, just because of all the barriers that I set. And these pilot programs, while they're great, it still holds a lot of barriers for a lot of students who have to go through hours and hours of paperwork, bringing in pay stubs that will eventually lead them to losing out on that benefit, because apparently they make too much. So if higher education have a timeline, and if there's a plan for higher education to cut off a lot of these, there's vetting process for students who are going through it. Because I know students who are homeless and oftentimes don't receive these benefits because of all the vetting process that are included within this program. So.
Yes, and I'm brutally honest, if nothing else. The answer is we don't have a timeline. And the answer is not going to be resolved by one department, the Department of Higher Education, magically, that is an underfunded department to begin with underfunded institutions. This has got to be a broader solution. This is really has to be more than just our institutions of higher education. This has to be the communities. This has to be state government. This has to be federal government. That's the only way we're going to do it. We managed to build a coalition that was basically state government and our institutions, because that's what we have some authority over. So I wish I could tell you that in 5 years, homelessness among college students will be eliminated. I can't guarantee that. I'm not going to tell you something that I can't promise to deliver. But the big thing is, in the last few years, we've recognized it through surveys that it's a problem. And that's the first step. Once you realize it's a problem, then, as you were saying, give me a solution. And that's where we've started to move forward. But there's clearly more to do. But I think keeping it on the radar screen is really essential. Don't forget that it's a problem, and we need to resolve it.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have one last question from you, from Robert, and he joined as a panelist, so he can ask the question live.
Thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner. I completely agree with you about the broad-based effort that is needed. I think this needs to be all hands on deck. Along those lines, are there specific initiatives legislatively that we can advocate for as student leaders that would help make sure that we really push this equity agenda forward in the strongest way possible?
There are, and let me tell you one that's been successful, and I know President Pedraja will talk about it. One of the things that that our data show us is that affordability for covering tuition fees and other issues are not the only obstacle. I'm not saying it's not an obstacle. Financial aid has increasingly been directed particularly at low-income students on our community colleges, and now expanded to UMass and the state universities. But supports, the kind of supports that make a difference, supports on things like that Anna mentioned, and homelessness and hunger and other things, are really important. And there was a legislative item, Luis, was 2 years ago, that put $15 million just for the community colleges to begin addressing that, to hire more advisors, hire more people to build the capacity to deal with this, because many of our institutions don't have the capacity. I mean, President Pedraja will probably tell you how many students per advisor, and it's very, very, very high. So I think things like that are critical. There are other policies, for example, budgetarily, we've really asked, and the last 3 years have gotten significant increases in financial aid. And in Massachusetts, a third of the financial aid that goes out to colleges and universities goes to private institutions. And what we have done is we've basically taken that money, the growth in financial aid, and said, we're going to target largely low-income students at community colleges, because that's where, if we're going to make a difference, we have to start there. So again, the legislature has been very supportive of some of these efforts. I think at some point with this equity agenda, they will realize that it has to be a more comprehensive solution rather than a line item here, a program there. It has to be a more comprehensive and larger investment in public higher education. And I think we'll get there.
I completely agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for answering all our questions, and thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to discuss with you, ask questions, and interact in any way. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to turn the panel over to Dr. Pedraja, President of Quinsigamond Community College, to discuss how college leaders view and address racism among their institutions, how that affects students, and his experience as a college president. Thank you for joining us, Mr. President.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to be able to briefly share a little bit on this. Before we get there, I also want to make sure that I thank the commissioner, because he's done quite a bit in the state to lead the equity initiatives and to support community colleges, which I think is important, because we do serve the most diverse number of students. And unfortunately, we receive the least amount of money. I have some slides I put together for myself. I can be happy to share it, or I can just talk from them. But if not, I would keep on talking, because this is a topic that I can talk about for quite some time. So let me see if I can share the screen. Okay. Can you see the screen, the diversity screen?
Yes.
Okay. And let me put it so I can see it a little bit bigger, and go to the slide presentation. Okay. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is, first of all, as a college president, how, the question is, how do I confront racism, and how do I lead through these challenging times? And the first thing that I want to do is share something about the importance of context. And who I am as someone who has experienced discrimination. And I pulled the slides from other presentations I've done just so I could share a bit with you. I'm a Cuban American, I'm an immigrant, and I am also a first generation college student. I grew up in a low income inner city environment. When my parents were trying to figure out how to fill out the FAFSA, they had to hire an accountant. They did not know how to do this kind of work. And I also experienced marginalization. There was a time when I was in college, I was working in Houston, a summer program, doing summer camps for kids. I was driving a van to pick up the kids, and the van stalled, and I couldn't get it started. Police car pulled behind me. They turned the lights on. I thought they were out there to help me. Instead, the policeman asked for my ID, what I was doing driving the van, threatened to take me to prison because he said my driver's license was expired, which it wasn't. He just had a Florida driver's license. It was when a couple that was down the street that lived there came out and who knew me and the work I was doing in the community started telling him, you know, hey, he's doing something here that he said, well, I'm too busy to take you to jail, so I'll just let you go. It was a white couple. And the thing that struck me after George Floyd of that experience was that the neighborhood I was in when I was stopped was, you know, close to where George Floyd had grown up in Houston. He would have been the same age as the kids that was helping out in those summer camps. For all I know, he might have been one of the kids in those summer camps. And even at that level, you know, there I was, college student, but I was a Latino and maybe in the wrong neighborhood driving a van. And I think that really stuck with me, that I could have been taken to prison. I could have experienced something more horrible at that time. And that experience and others, you know, in some ways are driven to me. I experienced my discrimination in other areas, even when I started teaching, looking for an apartment where I was told that they couldn't, that they were full and didn't have any openings. And as I was talking to them, I said, oh, too bad, because I'm just starting teaching here at the college. And then they changed. Oh, maybe we have a space. They immediately had judged me just in the way I looked. And there I was, a college professor. And that keeps on going on through my life. So in some ways, advocacy for being an anti-racist, for diversity, equity, and inclusion has been part of my DNA from a very young age. And speaking up is part of what I think we need more people to do. But as a Latino, I'm not immune from it. And there's even a greater standard when you become a president that doesn't go away. People still see you as a Latino president that has to prove themselves. If I do an equity initiative, it's part of, you know, because I'm Latino, it's a Latino president's equity initiative and the agenda, where others might not experience the same agenda. We also been trying to lead through the pandemic. And we all know the horrible things that happened in terms of race during the pandemic, but we also know that people of color were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, that there were more cases, and that it had a lot of impact on all of you as students, on our communities, and particularly minoritized communities. The unemployment rate among Latinos went to 14.2%. Latino males have dropped significantly, also Black males have dropped, and we're trying to find ways to get them back. The psychological impact, the physical impact, and the fact that the structural inequalities that we face and the overt racism that has happened in the national media has traumatized our students, because you can't see a person of color being murdered on TV and not think that could have been me, that could have been my child, that could have been my brother or sister. There's a trauma that's there that we're going to have to deal with. And I think there are some challenges that the pandemic just made more overt, that which have been underlying in the terms of racial disparity and racist attitudes in our nation that might have been there all along, but people hadn't acknowledged as much. We also saw a significant impact on the pandemic in terms of our populations. If you would look at the course pass rates for women and men, you see it's unequal, and that students that were on Pell also struggled more, and students of color dropped. This is just a statistics at Quinsig for between fall 19 and fall 20. And you can see that there is a drop. The pandemic had an effect, and particularly on people of color. The systemic discrimination that people of color face in our colleges and in our communities, because you can't separate the two, are there and real. So how do you lead change during this times? The first thing is know the history. Know that this is not a problem that just emerged yesterday. This has been there all along. It's been centuries building up. And know the history of redlining. Know the history of segregation. Understand that the laws, the structures were built to disadvantage some and give an advantage to others, and that people were not treated equally, and that has a proportional effect. So if you weren't able to go to college or get an education earlier because you didn't have the resources, that means that you won't be able to succeed in the future, and your kids will also be at a disadvantage to start off with. So that's important. Face the facts. We need to look at the data. The Board of Higher Education has shown the significant gap of over 40% between Latino males and white females. And then, Black males, Black females, Latina women, they're all in between in those 40%. There is a significant gap. And we also know that the students that go through those standardized tests, the people of color get placed there more often. We know they discriminate, but when I took the pass rates here on our campus and broken down by demographic and put it for the faculty and the staff to see at an old college meeting, I heard a gasp from the audience, because you can't argue against the facts. And the disparities were so evident that it really stunned people. And they came to me afterwards, and said, what we can do. Because there's a lot of myths and stuff about why the students of color fail. But the reality is that we're creating the barriers. Maybe they're good intentions, but the standardized tests and developmental ed are significant barriers. Then I think you have to make it matter. You have to prioritize closing these gaps, recognizing that as a society, we can't succeed if a group in our society is not able to succeed. You have to articulate a compelling vision for people to rally behind. And for us, it's been that we are not going to rest until we achieve 100% student success. Benefits all students, but those who have been disproportionately marginalized and disadvantaged are going to benefit as well, and even more. And that's the key, to make sure that everybody has equitable ability to succeed. Then walk the talk. It's very easy. A lot of places are putting plans in place and putting it out there for the community equity plans. If you don't put money behind them, they don't mean anything. If you don't put positions behind them, if you don't take action, if you're not visible in the community, because a lot of times we're just looking at higher education as a microcosm, but we've got to understand that we're getting kids that are coming from the K-12 system, where here in Worcester, the suspension rates, particularly for Hispanics, but also other minorities, was disproportionate from other groups. And why was that? You had people putting in suspension, taken out of school, that were in first to third grade kids. And the minute that you take a kid who misbehaved and suspend them and do all this drastic actions, they start internalizing that and says, I'm not good enough to succeed. And the community support systems, if they're not there for especially community college students who live in and work in our communities, it's going to affect their schoolwork. And we can do so much by providing the food pantries, the housing, and so much, and those things. But it's very difficult to address just in the microcosm of the community. That's why I'm active in our community. I helped create the Latino Empowerment Organizing Network in Worcester that's gotten traction, and we're able to create a Commission on Latino Affairs for the city that's going to start up, and other things. You have to do the work, and you have to lead by example. As a president and a Latino, I have to show up. I have to speak up. I can't just ignore it. And I got to show the community what we're doing here so they can also grow. The other thing about it is to recognize that equality is often the enemy of equity. And people say, what? You know, how can that be? But you think about it. I hear a lot of people say, but the standardized test makes things equal for everybody. We have equal access. We want to give equal opportunity. The reality is that if you don't start off in a comparable position, equal does not mean equitable. If I didn't get a good education, if I didn't have resources, if I'm going to class hungry or don't have a places to eat, that equal doesn't mean anything. You have to be equitable in order to have equal opportunity. So equity needs to happen before we can have equality. And we can't use equality as a crutch or an excuse for creating barriers that are going to disadvantage people. If you have $10 and you have your friend has $20 and you go to a restaurant, you can have equal access to the restaurant, the menu, but you're going to afford less and you're going to eat less. And that's the reality. Equality is not the same as equity. Access doesn't, and diversity are great, but just because you have people that are diverse in a community doesn't make it, again, equitable, and doesn't mean you include them. You don't listen to their voices, their issues, and you don't recognize that. Diversity is not equity, and it's not inclusion. We have to work to overcome the gaps and create a more inclusive environment. That's the only way we're going to make a change. Here at QCC, we've taken a number of initiatives, and it's a long list. We have a DEI initiative that I started when I came. We've been identifying gaps like the placement exams and developmental ed, as well as some of the other challenges. We're focused on student success, and the commissioner mentioned that success funding that we receive from the legislature. That's helping us because we have created and brought forth more advisors. And some success advisors are dealing with vulnerable populations. We've gotten some success building a case management approach to advisors, because if not, people will just be randomly assigned. Now you work with the students through your whole first year, and they're being more holistic. It's not just about getting you in classes, it's really about advising you. Focusing on student success. We put DEI in the strategic plan as part of our identity. I created the President's Advisory Council on Equity, PACE. So it's faculty and staff and other leaders that come together and advise me on issues, that develop how do we respond to racial incidents and other things throughout the campus. Brave space, courageous conversations. Your voice matters for faculty and staff to talk about race issues. We started a year-long DI workshops for administration, and then asked if they could do it, our union. So we did it for staff. We're doing DEI event. This week is DEI week from student services here. We did a DEI assessment. We brought an external person to do that. And then we created an equity task force that's working with the consultant to address the issues that were found. And now we're going to start putting an ad out for the executive director for the diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's while I believe as everybody's work, it's very difficult to do it when you're short-staffed. I'm trying to move fast because I know I'm running out of time. I want to leave enough time for questions. So what can we do to ensure a better future? First is learn, educate yourself about the facts, the history, the background. Go prepare with knowledge, because if not, you might not be able to address the issues. And a lot of times the facts show you the gaps, and it's harder for people to argue when you put it that way. Or things like, why is equity important for the community as a whole? It's not just not leaving people behind. It's that if you leave people behind, those people are not going to be productive members of the community, and you won't be able to thrive economically. So it's in everybody's interest. Outside of the character and moral arguments, you can make arguments also for why it's in everyone's best interest. You have to act. You have to engage in dialogue. You can't just ignore it. And you can't assume that it's just a people of color's job. a lot of times it's placed on those of us who have borne the weight of the discrimination to change the system that was created to oppress us. Yes, we're doing that work, but we need allies. We need other people that will step up and do that as well. Teach, educate others. A lot of times people are ignorant, or they choose to be. They want to ignore that. Include, and by including means remove barriers. Be willing to listen to those difficult conversations. You know, a safe space doesn't guarantee a good discussion, because then I feel threatened. It's like the Florida laws that, you know, you don't want to make a white person uncomfortable with discussing race. That's ridiculous. That's the only way you're going to discuss it and dismantle things. You have to remove the barriers, and then you need to name things when you see it. You know, you need to name racism. You need to seek opportunities to address the issues. And you have to have hope, because without hope, we can't do it. And lastly, I did this for something that this last two slides for some of the stuff that I have worked on. And, you know, I want to leave with this. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And yesterday in Your Voice Matters, we're discussing race. A lot of people were dealing with this difficult situations, and they were like, we need some hope. And I said, I think we need to deal with the pain. We need to face the issues, but hope is essential. But it shouldn't lead us to complacency and think that somebody's going to do it the way for us. It should spur us to action. So we need to help increase awareness of gaps, and it's happening. I feel hope that there's renewed activism and advocacy. The students like you, the next generation, are talking about it, that we are getting support for it. So I do feel a glimmer of hope for the future, even in the midst of the darkness. And as has been said by many, you know, lighting one candle is all that is needed, because darkness cannot stand in the light. And the only way we can make change is by doing this together. And I'm going to stop sharing if I figure out how.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for always keeping it real and for your inspiring words. I have witnessed and experienced firsthand the wonderful work you're doing at Muskegon Community College. And thank you so much for sharing your experience. I'm hoping that presidents around the Commonwealth and the nation follow your lead on so many aspects. And thanks so much for joining. I would like to open it up for some questions for President Pedraja. And I have a question myself. So at the Council of Presidents level, the community college segment, what is the commitment in terms of promoting racial equity and promoting anti-racism initiatives?
I can only speak for the community colleges, but the Council of Presidents have wonderful colleagues, and they all have a very deep commitment to making changes. So I put a list of some of the initiatives we have in our campus. A lot of our campuses have initiatives. Not only are they working to remove the barriers such as standardized tests, developmental ed, but they're also working to implement some of the changes that the Success Fund has allowed us to do by increasing advisors. I know some campuses have brought multilingual advisors to help serve communities that don't speak the language. We have transitional advisors that help with people to transition from environments like prison, but also adult education and others into college, and to deal with vulnerable communities. Most of them have equity initiatives of one nature or another. They've done assessment, they've created institutes, several have hired DEI officers for their campus. So the commitment is there, and we've even worked in a state framework. I think the challenge sometimes is that we are limited in resources. So I would urge the state and you as you advocate for the state is that don't put plans in place or even ask us to do things unless you're willing to find some funds to help make this happen. It's very difficult to do it without funding. And as the commissioner said, and I share, community college serve the largest number of diverse students, and yet we get the least amount of money. And I don't know if there's a correlation between that. Maybe that historically there is, but I think that needs to change. The success funds are helping, but we need a lot more. The other thing is we need to tackle this as an ecosystem. Community colleges don't exist in a vacuum. We're a community in the name. So our students are out there. So if they're experiencing racism at work, discrimination in housing, food insecurity, and other issues, we can do food pantries on campus and try to put housing of some sort, but we have to tackle it with the community. So we can't just be the campus on the on the hill. We need to be the campus in the midst of the community, advocating for these changes, not just within campus, but without the campus. And I think that we need to recognize that as we develop any kind of equity initiatives, agendas, as we move into the future, that ecosystem type of work needs to happen to help our students thrive, and then have the difficult conversation on campus. We're having to do work that it's not just it can't be just top down. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things our equity audit showed, that a lot they felt it was top down. Well, yeah, I'm the president, so it's good, and I believe in this, so it's got to be to some degree top down. But we have to get buy-in at our organic level. We got to change minds and hearts. We can put all the laws in place and policy changes. We need to change hearts and minds, and we have to educate people and help them confront these issues.
Thank you, Ms. President. Anna, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, how are you? So when we talk about racism, and I think you said it yourself that community college cater to a really diverse student from all walks of life, which includes immigrants coming to the country as first-time immigrants. So I wanted to ask, do Quinsigamond Community College have, or community college in general, have a place where they protect students' data and making sure, because I know because immigrants are prone to racism, we have a lot of time ISIS who goes to campus requesting students' data, and also sometimes some places create a safe space on campus or call themselves a safe space to help cater to students during those time of a raid, or making sure that students' data are not given to ISIS when they come to campus. So it's Quinsec and community college in general fostering those ideals in protecting their students, especially their immigrant students who might be undocumented.
We've had some of those conversations at the community college level. I know that when I came in, I made sure I talked to our campus police, and there a lot of times people cooperate with ICE, and I said it's not our job, and legally it would be like federalizing the campus police. So unless there's like a warrant out because of dangerousness, somebody that committed a crime in the community, I said you cannot assist on that. We've also tried to use FERPA as a barrier to access to our student data. I've also worked to develop some funding for undocumented students, and we have the presidential scholarships that our foundation started, because I had students that would come and say, I don't have access to financial aid because I'm undocumented, or I'm an immigrant and I'm running out of money, I have emergency needs. And I had to find a strategy so I could get them money quickly to finish their education or to get them through. And we have this, and we just started. We put $20,000 this spring semester, and we went through it in a matter of months. And then we've looking at how do we up it, because there is need for those students. I hope that answers your question. But we recognize also that we've been trying to work with the immigrant students because, particularly in the last administration, there was a lot of barriers for immigrants and a lot of fear because of the law that said that you can be a burden on the state or have state resources, and a lot of them were afraid to take any kind of food stamps or other assistance. So we try to address that with them and work with legal services for that.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a question from Robert. Along the lines of what you emphasize about taking actionable steps towards improvement, what steps are being taken to help better diversify the ranks of the counselors providing mental health services?
And that's an excellent question. Mental health is difficult. For instance, here at Quincy, we have one person for, on average, we have 7,000 students on campus in a given semester. And that's just a credit student, not kind of the workforce. There are more. And we have one person to provide those services. We just hire a social worker as a second person. But the challenge is we have to diversify that group of providers, and getting just any provider is been a challenge for community colleges and for the community in general. Just not enough. A lot of them won't take students. They're working with insurance companies, and they have long wait lists. We've also been working with like a nurse practitioner, a mental health nurse practitioner that can help address this. But I think you are correct that in diversifying that group is a challenge. And it's a significant challenge, diversifying faculty and counselors, where I have some control, which is in the administrative areas. We've added more people of color, and also, but in other places, it's been a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have one more question. How can the Department of Higher Education and the Student Advisory Council in particular weigh in supporting institutions on educating their students on how to stand up against racism?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. I think that there are, first of all, a lot of resources and organizations out there that can do this. And we've tried to bring them in. And like I mentioned, we have what we call brave space or courageous conversations, where some of our faculty facilitate discussions with students. But one of the things that came out of our equity analysis, again, you have to change hearts and minds. And I do believe that diversity is critical for education. We don't live in bubbles. And although our world tends to go to this tribalism and trying to be isolationist and to think of race identity as a defining character for nations and things, we need to shift the hearts and mind. And that means having those conversations. Encountering people of other cultures enriches us, enriches our perspective, makes us understand the world better, and will help us be more competitive in a global environment in the future. If we just put a cover over our head, it would hurt. So understanding that this is a benefit for all, for democracy, for economic survival, for us to be competitive in a global market, and that it enriches the educational experience, because you're forced not only to understand other people's cultures and struggles and worldview, but it also helps you explain your own and understand your own vis-a-vis theirs. So that's the first step. And I think the second step is the more students like yourselves that speak up and say, we need this, and we need the training, because one of the things that came out of the survey was, and our assessment was, that maybe we need to create train the trainer models. So if the state would help fund some of that, I can put some money, but to scale it to the level that we need, it might be helpful to have some groups that can come in and train people to address racism and other pieces, anti-racism strategies, because it is dangerous work. You never know when somebody will pull out a gun and attack you. You never know when you stand up that how you'll be put down. And one of the things I've learned in my years of activism is that, you know, our gut tendency is to attack, to go on the attack, to scream, to because we're outraged when we see it. And I think in a case of somebody's life is in danger or is being attacked, we need to act more decisively. But I think in general, what works best is engaging people, confronting them. Took years, centuries to create the structures, and dismantling will take some time, but we got to keep pushing and pushing and push. It's a constant push, not the momentary outrage, but the constant push, and constantly taking that stand and constantly forcing people to the table to engage in dialogue that's going to transform society.
Thank you for your answer. And one more last question before we move to the student panelists. Artie, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here today. I noticed in your presentation you did touch upon a little bit of intersectionality, but I was wondering how exactly you as a college president and the Council of Presidents is taking intersectionality into account when they make policies regarding equity. So not just addressing people of color, but also people of color with disabilities, or trans people of color, or women of color. Because as you get into those intersectional aspects, people often face more than one type of oppression.
That's a good observation, and I think one of the important thing is, and when I used to teach courses on culture and diversity, I used to put up graphs and show, you know, because there is also a tendency when you deal with intersectionality is that of some groups thinking that they're more oppressed than others, or they don't understand how, you know, maybe a white man who happens to be gay might face some level of a challenge that a white woman might not face, but women might face something because of gender. The first issue is that intersectionality can be used as a point of conversation, of understanding, of finding the commonalities that we face in different cultures. So I might not feel the same pain that you do, but I can understand it because I feel this pain, and having those dialogues. But the other reason I've known people of color who also happen to be women, who also happen to be gay or trans, and then all of a sudden they're sitting there thinking, I get it for like 5 sides. You know, I get it because I'm a woman, I get it because I'm gay, I get it because I'm trans, I get it because I'm Latina, I get it, you know, and you know, the issue of that is to also recognize that there are some cases that people have a harder time dealing with it. But the first step is that conversation, using that as a way of understanding common ground, and helping people understand that you could have privilege in one area of your life and be discriminated in another. And some people can also pass more easily than others in society. So disabilities or different abilities affect a lot of our students. But that could be used as a way to engage in the dialogues about how do we make things more inclusive and equitable for everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we've reached the end of the Q&A session. Thank you to all the students for asking their questions, and thank you so much, Mr. President, for joining us, for your speech and for answering our questions. It's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. Moving forward to our wonderful student panelists. So we're joined today by, as I mentioned, Anna Johnson, student trustee from Worcester State University, and Artie Capella, student trustee from Bridgewater State University. So we'll start with Anna first. Anna, the floor is yours.
Hi, how are you guys? And I first want to thank the commissioner and the president of QCC for being here and talking more about what they're doing in their particular offices to help stand against racism, but to also help combat racism in their own way. And I think that it's really important that we listen to this, because as people in higher ed or as students in higher ed, it's important that we learn what these people are doing, because at the end of the day, these are the people sitting at the table that we are dependent on for the change that we need. So it's important to kind of be here and listen to them and their work that they're doing, because it's also a really good way for us to have critiques, have questions, and to demand more, because they are there for us. So just utilizing this opportunity to know that we can send them questions and have them come to spaces like this to speak, I think that's super important. And I think I would like to say that, you know, we have heard a lot today about what the different institution or what the commissioner or what higher ed is doing. And I want to bring it back to what we are doing as a college campuses and how we can help stand against racism. You know, I think that it is no secret that the inequalities or the injustice of people of color or just marginalized group in general are facing are being televised. And a lot of us are watching it day in and day out. It's the same thing happening in Ukraine. And the same thing happening when we have Afghanistan refugees coming to our campuses, or we have our classmates who are food insecure or housing insecure. I think that it is important for us to recognize that these problems exist on our campus, and as student leaders or as students in general, it is our duty to stand up, to speak up against systems that foster these ideals, systems that are racist, systems that are discriminatory to people that are in our community. And one way we can do that is by seeing something and saying something. It's just, I think a lot of time we don't speak on things because we think it doesn't involve us. And I think that it's more important that we raise the awareness for what is going on. We raise the awareness of what is happening to people of color, what is happening to the LGBTQ plus community, what is happening to our different immigrants coming from different places. And I think that we are also our brother's keepers. So we need to stand up and support them by, going to different events. And I like to say that a lot of time what keeps racism on campus is this identity of white power. And a lot of us go to a predominantly white school. So a lot of time we have a lot more people who don't look like us, who don't foster the same ideals as us, who do not understand our struggles in these different places that kind of are there to support us. And one thing we can do about that is ask for more resources that benefit all of us around. And I think that as student of color, a lot of times you might see your spaces as totally white because of the university you might be in. But I think that it's more ways where we can invite people that don't look like us, people that go to the university that oftentimes are not represented at the tables that we are. And a lot of times students tend to judge other students by their dress code, how they come to class, whether they're coming to class at all. I think that we turn to judge and determine who a person is just by looking at them and never have an opportunity to actually engage. And I think that a lot of schools, like I saw Cape Cod University had this thing where they did a professional day where they brought students on campus and help teach them how to get ready for an interview. These are little things we can do because the inequality is not just racism is real, but I think that what the president of QCC was talking about equity, a lot of time we don't have access, students don't have access to these things. And we say, they go to Bridgewater or they go to Worcester State, so they have career services, but we're not realizing that it is one thing to have a services, but it's one thing to have a services that understands you and your needs. And I think that a lot of campuses are dealing with that, with the lack of diversity among faculties and among staff. And what we students can do is making sure that we are that voice, we are the one advocating, like Yo was saying, some of us are leaving, but what are we doing to make sure that this tradition continues? That when we leave, that we have students standing up in the different position, asking not just for ourselves, but all students that look like us. My role as a trustee member, I get to sit on the board of trustees where I advocate on legislators that benefit and affect students on campus. And I think that that's a really important role because I'm not just speaking for Anna, I'm speaking for a student of color that looks like Anna. I'm speaking for the LGBTQ students on campus. I'm speaking for students who face discrimination, inequality, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or gender. And I think that those are really important roles, but I'm tend to be judged by just being a Black woman sitting on these tables, and it's important that as students, what we can do with that is making sure that we kind of call out systems that do that, going on campus, calling out offices or calling out departments that kind of foster the ideals. And I know that as student leaders or as advocates or activists, it's not easy to call out the system that we are in. But I think that it's important that we start doing it. We start doing the groundwork, like going to Student Advisory Council, working on legislators that are calling for equity on open education resources, doing things that foster those ideals and making sure that we hold our system accountable. And a lot of times, people who are marginalized might not be able to use their voices the right way to hold system accountable. This is where we step in as student leaders, regardless of our colors, regardless of the issue. I think that we can hold system accountable. We can hold institutions accountable for the way they foster. And I like to say a lot of time, my success level is measured through the white students' lens. And maybe I may be wrong, but that's how I feel a lot of time when it comes to higher education, that everything I do is measured by the next white student beside me. And I think that one thing we can do as student leaders or as students in general is making sure that we are asking our institution to create equitable resources or equitable programs that does not just focus on what it means to be a white student in America or what it means to be, a Black student in America, but what it means to be an immigrant student in America, what it means to be a first generation student. I think that we are responsible for calling out these systems. So I think that we can do more, that we should be doing more, that we should be using our voices. We should be joining committees. We should be sitting at tables that are doing this work, but not just doing it for ourselves and people that look like us, but doing it for all people who are marginalized. So I'd like to leave you guys with something I like to say. Today, I would like every one of you in higher education to remember, I'm not just a Black girl who enjoys wearing hoodie or do-rag. I'm a Black girl who means no harm. I'm a girl living a normal life like everyone. I'm not a threat to you or society. So please don't judge me based on my skin color, my choice of clothes, or my hoodie. But I hope you judge me based on my character. I am not just Anna. I'm not just a Black woman. There's a lot to me that a lot of time I tend to be judged from that. And a lot of time we turn to judge people by what they wear, how they look. And I want us to remember that if we are going to foster a safe and inclusive community and campuses, that we need to stop judging, that we need to start putting people in boxes. I think college application does that enough by putting us in boxes. And I think that when we come to campus, we want to feel welcome. We want to know that if there's a town hall for racism that we are having, or our white student at that town hall, it shouldn't be a town hall to address racism and the only people in the room are the student of color. It's almost like you have a complaint, but you're complaining to yourself again. The people who are supposed to hear the complaint are not at the table. I want to make sure that when we have events about pride on campus, that we are all going there, we are all supporting them. So I think that it's important that when there are different events on campus that foster the ideals or that talks about different diversity and different diverse groups, that we are part of those conversations, that we are making sure that those conversations are not go unheard, like we are promoting it, that we're coming to them. So I want to say thank you guys also for doing this work, being in Student Advisory Council, advocating on different legislators, putting your time in open education resources. But I can say there's more work to be done. We're not closer to the finish line. We are still at the back of the finish line, and we can work together as a community to get to the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if I'm being honest, I got goosebumps from your remarks. You're always amazing, and I really appreciate all the work you've been doing so far. It's been a great pleasure and an honor working with you as part of the Student Advisory Council. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story. Artie, the floor is yours if you're ready.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I just want to start off by saying my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I always have to say that at the beginning where people just assume that I'm a guy. But I wanted to start my speech with a quote from a former educator, advocate, and presidential advisor, Booker T. Washington. A lie doesn't become truth, a wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it's accepted by the majority. Next, I want to address that I am part of the majority. As a white person, I am honored to be here, but I do recognize the space that I'm taking up. And I also recognize that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people of color that would be better served by speaking at this event. My speech today and my remarks are not for those people of color. In fact, they are for my fellow white allies. As these people of color face racism every day and they know what it is like to fight it, we have to learn and make sure we are intentionally doing what we can to lighten the load of that labor and to hopefully one day make a world where equity is available for all people. Next, to address some things. Being an ally is a full-time gig, and we cannot do it when it's trendy. Black squares and posts about how sad we are of people dying in the streets is great as long as you're doing it consistently. If you are just doing it when it is fun or everyone else is, then you are not being helpful and you are being performative. Remember that in the words of BLM activists and people who fight racism daily, this is not a moment, this is a movement. And we need to make sure that we don't stop until there is equity for all. With that being said, burnout is real. And sadly, a lot of people, when they start doing this work, especially as white people, do face burnout pretty quickly. We cannot let that stop us from doing this work, though, because if we stop, we are done uplifting people of color and we are done fighting for what is right. There's ways to combat burnout by making time for yourself and decompressing after especially emotional days. But remember, if you are feeling burnout from learning this information and fighting it that day, imagine what a person of color feels from having to do it every day without a choice. With that being said, there's a few things we can do as students to educate ourselves and to make sure that we are fighting racism. First and foremost, we need to recognize the space that we're taking up. We need to know when to listen and when to advocate. If you are in a situation where you are going to a cultural event or you are going to the Office of Cultural Engagement on campus, it might be your time to listen. It might be your time to not contribute to that conversation, but to instead hear what they are saying. A big part of advocacy is knowing what people want. It's knowing when to uplift people's voices. Another way to uplift people on our campus is by encouraging VOC students to go for leadership roles, especially those that are not part of cultural organizations. If POC people see leadership in organizations such as Greek Life, Student Government, or PC, we might have more people more inclined to go for these roles. These roles are not reserved for white students, and by having people of color in them, we are fortunate enough to learn and grow from those students within our organizations in a way that we would be able to not grow beforehand. Advocacy should be intersectional. We should not just be advocating for white students. So by having these people in our organizations, they are able to help us learn, grow, and become better. Lastly, it is not on the job of people of color to educate you. As an ally, you need to seek out this information yourself. And luckily, as a college student, you have the widest access to information regarding race and how to improve it. There is never a lack of information within your university's database that can educate you on race. And as a disabled person, I recognize that that information is not always accessible. It can sometimes be hard to read, and it can sometimes be intentionally written so that people with higher education levels are the only ones who can read it. It is important that if you cannot read that information, you seek it out in other ways. Many articles regarding race have summaries on Google, and Google is free. So even after college, you can take steps to make sure that you are educating yourself through using systems like Google or your local library. It is also important that we stay engaged. We are the most educated generation ever, and we need to keep that momentum. The best way we can do this is by voting and running for positions in our local governments, even after college. I'm fortunate enough to serve in my college governance and advocate for people of color and disabled people and LGBT people and every student on my campus. But when I leave here, I need to first stay an engaged alumni and engage in the community where I land. If we do not run for these positions, then they're going to stay with the people who have them now. And the systems of power that are here oppressing people will remain. But if we run and vote for people we believe in, then that is how we defeat systematic racism. That is how we change the power. Remember, voting takes 2 seconds. And although it is becoming harder to vote in many parts of this country, we are fortunate enough to live in Massachusetts, where it is pretty easy to get an absentee ballot, or if you are close to your home, vote in hours of early or late voting. I once again want to acknowledge that I'm privileged to be here, and that I'm so sorry for my stutter. I want to acknowledge that I'm privileged to be here, and that I will never be able to say enough words to compliment what was said before me. Everyone was speaking here today, I thank you for your time and your effort into making sure our colleges, universities, and societies are more educated and better off than they were before. And I kept my remarks short today so that we could have more time to focus on the powerful words that you guys have brought to this table. Thank you again for the space, and that is all I have.
Thank you so much, Artie, for your wonderful remarks. Similar to Anna, you're an amazing student leader, and the work you've been doing with Bridgewater State University. And furthermore, it's truly remarkable. Thank you so much for joining, for helping organizing the Campus Community Building Day, and for sharing your story over here. Anna, would you like to add something? Sorry.
Oh yeah, I think as we talk about racism, I would like to add one thing, which I think a lot of times we forget to do, which is the land acknowledgement. So I would like to read a small statement about the land that we are on. So, one step towards a most just society is acknowledging and naming the wrongs that we have done and in the past and woven in our life together today. But as we often care for our views, therefore, with deep respect, I acknowledge that I am here on the ancestral land of the indigenous people of Nigma and Wampanoag Nation. I acknowledge the painful history of genocide, slavery, and forcible relocation onto reservation. I think it's really important that we all recognize this land that we are on, because it is a step towards combating the racism that we are seeing today.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and it's really needed and remarkable for us to acknowledge the land we're in right now. That's a big step towards fighting racism and promoting equity in so many levels. So thank you so much for that. That being said, this is the end of our webinar. I'm not sure if there are any questions for our student panelists or any further discussion topics. Please let me know. Actually, I have a question for both of you before we move forward. I would like to hear what both of you are doing in your institutions in terms of promoting this Campus Community Building Day, the events that are happening today, and what you guys are doing in terms of promoting the equity agenda in general. I know both of you do important work, so let's share that with the rest of the attendees.
I can go first, Anna, if that's okay. Awesome. So I'm fortunate enough to be working with, I think, one of the best SGA presidents in Massachusetts, who has planned events for next week. Although today is the statewide community building day, we were working with Legacy and Legacy, which is a camp office on this campus for diverse students, and our police department to plan barbecue where students can just get to know those two offices, as well as an open kind of panel where people can ask questions to those offices specifically. As far as the equity agenda, my school has been fortunate enough to do a complete racial justice task force that ended with, I believe, 84 recommendations to the school. I've been making sure that my administration stays accountable with these recommendations, and that we didn't just recommend without action. I've seen the employment office at my school be able to include more intentionality in recruiting and hiring people of diverse backgrounds and making sure that these people, that these people are coming to our campus with experience and knowledge that is able to help us in the long run. I've also been able to make sure that we are celebrating people of diversity and cultural organizations within our campus. If there are people from Bridgewater watching, definitely go to the African Student Association's Blueprint Fashion Show on the 16th of April. This is a program that happened pre-COVID and it's come back from 2 years of not happening. These diversity organizations are finally coming back, and they're coming back with a force. So what I'm doing is making sure that I, as an SGA member, and trying to convince my other SGA members and students to go to these organizations, to be present as white allies. As I spoke in my speech, it's important that we are there.
Thank you so much, Artie. Anna?
Oh, yeah. So similar to Artie, whilst my campus today will not be doing anything for Community Building Day, we started off with the semester of something I called Unity Walk. It was an initiative I got after listening to the impact of Community Building Day. So I brought it back to my campus, and during the spring semester, the fall semester, I planned what we call Unity Walk. We had over 400 students from different part of our campus being involved in that. Unity Walk is currently in the process of being part of a legislator to be Unity Day, which will include a lot of the unions on board, including faculty unions, to make sure that students will not go to classes that day, but the entire day will be focused on Unity Day from all walk of campus, having a lot of program. Last semester, it was really significant. We had students who brought flags, we had students who had towels, we had students who came with things that identified them. So we had students who came in drag. So it was really important to have that day because it kind of really signified Community Building Day, but also building unity on our campus individually. So I think that that's one of the things I am doing as a student trustee. Another thing we did is we had a police audit recently at our campus. I sit on the advisory board for that, where we are taking the recommendation from the police audit to help make sure we foster safe and equitable policing on our campus. And our campus has since implemented a lot of things from that, including adding a security guard to campus that maybe do some of the jobs that police officers, like responding to calls that police officers should not likely be responding to. And with that also, we have an equity audit that is going on our campus currently. So from that, we also have equity audit. We have a lot of students being a part of the equity audit for the very first time. We have a lot more respondents to this call. So our campus is doing a lot. Our strategic plan for our university that the president and some other campus member work on include equity on all 5 of the strategic plan, which is really important. Another thing we did, not this year, last semester, we had a fee freeze to also help with the COVID crisis that a lot of the students were dealing with. So there's a lot of things that we are doing, or a lot of things that I'm supporting my campus in doing to make sure that we are creating an equitable environment for our students, which I know the work is long, but that's the other things we're doing.
Thank you so much. And both the work you're doing and Artie's doing is remarkable, and people need to follow your lead and get inspired from the amazing work you both are doing. So thank you so much. Any further questions for our student panelists or the panelists in general? Please let me know. If not, we can end the webinar right here. We've covered pretty much everything. I am very excited, as this was a very informative, emotional, really inspiring webinar, and thanks so much to all of you for joining, for speaking, asking questions, and for participating in any way. So that is much appreciated, and we'll look forward to having. We won't be here for much long, but hopefully the next Student Advisory Council leaders will follow our lead and do something exciting. Thank you so much for joining. And if you're organizing any events on campus today, make sure today or in the coming days, make sure to take photos and use the hashtag Campus Community Day 2022. So thank you so much. Bye.